I forgot to drink a sip of water during the break there, so we're going to do that. All right, here we go. Children of Midgard, the live stream, chapter 4 is called The Letter. We hurried up the steep dirt slope of our driveway and found Dad's car still by the house. I got a bad feeling in my stomach. Mr. Kingsley strode to the house, unlocked it with Joe's house key, and threw the front door wide open. All of the lights were off except for the one above the kitchen sink. He called out, "Paul, it's VI. Are you here?" He turned to Miss Honeycutt. "Miss Honeycutt, would you please get the children settled?" "Of course," she answered. He thanked her and walked through the rest of the house, calling out for Dad. I walked into the kitchen and saw a folded piece of paper under the kitchen table. It didn't belong there, so I crawled under the table and picked it up. "Joe!" I shouted as soon as I got out from under the table. "Look at this! A note from Dad!" "What?" she yelled. I showed her the paper. "To Joanne and Stephen" was written in Dad's handwriting on it. Miss Honeycutt was standing behind us, looking at the paper too. She called out, "They have a note from Mr. Freyerson." "Should we open it together?" I asked. Joe nodded. My hands were shaking. We opened the letter and read it out loud together. "Dearest Joanne and Stephen, I've had to leave to go on an urgent trip. I have been waiting for a piece of news from the high north, and it just arrived, so I am traveling. I'm sorry to leave you like this. Be careful and stay safe. I will do the same. Do not leave the house until you receive word from me. As long as I am here to watch over you, you are safe in Freyerton, but when I am gone, you will not be safe any longer. You are exceptionally bright and inquisitive children. I am so proud of you both. You may be wondering why I stopped to write this note instead of waking you. If I had awakened you, it would have been hard for all three of us, so I chose to leave the note because I wanted to make this as painless as possible. Please understand how much I love you both. If it were possible, I would bring you with me, but the journey is not for children, even ones as smart and brave as you two. The terrain is rough, and the climate is unpredictable." The window above the kitchen sink flew open with a bang. Icy air blasted into the kitchen. Joe and Miss Honeycutt hurried to close and latch it. Joe called out, "Stephen, the thermometer!" "What?" I said. "Just look, it said 50 a minute ago." She pointed to the thermometer above the kitchen sink. The red line that displayed the temperature outside was dropping in a matter of seconds. 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 35, 30, and down until it stopped at 15 degrees. The sky outside grew suddenly dark as clouds rolled over the house. Joe's face was pale, and we exchanged a frightened glance. She said, "Let's finish the letter." "I will return home as soon as I can, and I'll explain everything when I do. In the meantime, some relatives and friends will be staying with you to watch over you and do the grown-up things that need doing. The first to arrive will be your great-aunt Madeline." At this, there was a series of 3 hard knocks at the front door. Joe read the rest out loud quickly. "She will tolerate being called Aunt Mattie, though she may act as though she dislikes it. She will explain everything you need to know. Until she arrives, do not leave the house for any reason. Remain where you are. Don't even go to school this morning. Help is on the way. I will see you both soon. Please do when Aunt Mattie asks, and treat her respectfully." Joe put the note on the table and said, "I'm not going to cry." She repeated it twice. I nodded and said, "I'm scared too. I wish we'd seen it this morning before the bees." Miss Honeycutt started to say something in a gentle tone, but the person outside knocked rapidly on the front door 3 more times. The knocks would not be ignored. "Stay here," said Mr. Kingsley. I noticed for the first time that his walking stick was slightly bloodied, and he held it as he walked into the front hall to answer the door. Joe and I stayed in the kitchen. I was torn between curiosity and fear. I did not want to encounter something else scary like the bees or the dog. I could hear Mr. Kingsley open the door, and a woman's voice boomed, "For goodness sake, V.I., put away that firearm. It can't be more than 12 degrees out here, maybe 16. Is there a chance you'll let me in out of the cold?" Aunt Mattie had arrived. I'm pretty sure my mouth was wide open when I first saw her. She walked into the room with Mr. Kingsley, and she was even taller than he was. Her hair was short and gray, and she had an expression that made it look like she was trying to hide mischief with sternness. She was holding a very large, very curious suitcase made of moss, the sort of soft, furry moss that covers stones on the forest floor. It had actual yellow flowers growing out of it. She dropped it and held out her hand. "Hello," she said in a tone that meant business. "I am your great-aunt Madeline. Am I correct to assume that you are Stephen?" I nodded. "And am I correct to assume that you have read your father's letter?" I nodded again. "And," she said a bit more sharply, "am I also correct to assume that you have been raised with manners befitting a gentleman?" "Excuse me?" I said, confused. "Tea, boy, tea. Oh, never mind." She turned to Joe and held out her hand. "You must be Joanne." "I am," said Joe. "Thank goodness. A pleasure. I should have asked you to begin with. I'll need a kettle, tea, and cups, please." She glanced around the kitchen and said, "I assume that your father has encouraged the two of you to call me Aunt Maddie. He seems to find that amusing for some reason. Very well, you may. Please allow me to speak to the adults for a moment." Mr. Kingsley and Miss Honeycutt quietly spoke alone with Aunt Maddie in the front hallway for a couple of minutes, said goodbye to us, and left. While they were doing that, Joe and I looked for everything she had asked for to make tea. If we had a kettle, we couldn't find it, and Dad didn't have any tea bags either. With Mr. Kingsley and Miss Honeycutt gone, we found ourselves face to face with a total stranger who was super tall and grouchy to boot. Joe cautiously said, "We couldn't find any tea." Aunt Maddie's response took me by surprise. She simply said, "Oh well, can't be helped," and set her moss carpet bag on the kitchen table, reached in, and withdrew all of the equipment necessary to brew tea. She filled her kettle with water, placed it on a burner, and said, "Your father has gone to the high north." And that is the end of chapter 4. It's a short one. And I'll do my musical shout out. We had Melody in E-flat by Tchaikovsky, played by Bella Fleck. Then we had Nocturne by Joe Hisaishi. Then we had Wish You Were Here by the Pickin' series, the same guys who did music in chapter 2. All right, thank you for continuing to listen to the story. I'm going to stop now, and then we're going to continue in just a moment with chapter 5, which is a little bit longer than chapter 4. All right, thanks, y'all.